Aizawa Podfics. Today we're going to be reading The Dorms Were Loud by Phantom Reads. This is a pretty short one shot that I found and really liked. Um, it is 1,400 words, and here's the summary. The dorms were loud this evening. The dorms were loud, but Izuku was quiet because he had to be. If he stayed quiet, if he left everyone else alone, then they could continue to bake, plan, and talk without disruption. The last thing he ever wanted to be was to be a burden. The dorms were loud this evening. Then again, the dorms were usually loud. But for Izuku, it felt as if the dorms were especially noisy tonight. He could hear Ashido and Sero baking in the kitchen under the explosive supervision of Kachan. He could hear Yao Momo and Ida set out in the dining tables, discussing the new study group they plan to hold next weekend. Uraraka, Kirishima, and Sue were parked on the floor of the common rooms, chattering about a television show they'd like to watch while they painted each other's nails. Uraraka's nails were pink, Sue's were black, and Kirishima's were red. Lounging on the couch were Juro, Tokiyami, and Shinzo, swapping their playlists and playing samples of their favorite bands. Even Todoroki was talking with Ojiro, and Kaminari about a theory they had come up with for their book they read in Cementos' class. So yes, the dorms were loud this evening, and every noise that echoed off the walls matched the hammering in Izuku's chest, his heart tattooing an imprint against his ribs. Thump, thump, thump. The dorms were loud, but Izuku was quiet because he had to be. If he stayed quiet, if he left everyone else alone, then they could continue to bake, plan, and talk without disruption. The last thing he ever wanted to be was to be a burden. So while the thoughts in his head screamed and the heart in his chest drummed against his lungs, Izuku stayed quiet. He stayed silent so that the dorms could be loud, so the peaceful atmosphere, all feather light and warm, could continue. Walking across the common area and slipping out the door without being noticed was easy. It was easy because the dorms were loud and no one had paid him any mind. The winter air was frigid as he breathed it in. Sharp shards of splintered ice embedded themselves in his lungs, cold and painful with every inhale. But it was quiet, because while inside, the dorms were loud. Out here, under the ink-colored sky, shrouded with heavy clouds that promised snow, it was silent. It was silent, which meant Izuku could let his thoughts scream, let his heart hammer, without interrupting anyone. Out here, with no sounds other than the creaking of branches, swaying in the cold wind, and the buzzing of street lamps that illuminated the campus in a soft orange glow, Izuku wasn't a burden to anyone. Inhale. There was no reason for him to be anxious, no reason for the company of dark thoughts that latched onto him with sharp teeth and serrated claws. There was no reason for the taunting voices in the back of his skull that whispered harsh words, worthless, stupid, annoying, pathetic, burden. Exhale. Finding himself sat on the cold bench, the damp wood pressed against his thighs and back, Izuku let himself break the silence. Dropping his head in his hands, a muffled sob tore through the still air like a clap of thunder in an unexpected storm. Out here, he didn't have to stay quiet, because there was no one around to disrupt with his needless crying. His shoulders shook, either from the cold or from his sobs. He wasn't sure. He didn't bother to keep his eyes open as stinging tears that pushed past his lashes blurred his vision, making the dark surroundings unintelligible. He could no longer hear the sounds of stiff branches or flickering lights because the beating of his heart moved to his temple and the constant pounding overshadowed any other noise. Which is why Izuku didn't hear the sound of soft footsteps, frozen blades of grass crunching beneath the soles of boots. He didn't see the black-clad figure approaching with cautious movements, as if wary of scaring off a timid animal. It was only when a voice, low and gruff, the sound of rumbling thunder, spoke to him, that he noticed the presence of another person. "It's cold out here," they said in an undecipherable tone. Izuku's tears, once flowing with abundance, began to slow, a rapid river slowing into a steady stream. The drumming in his temples quieted into a dull beat, still present, but not as painful. Perhaps it was the shock of hearing someone next to him, their words seemingly appearing in the air, abrupt and clear, that made Izuku's sobs falter. Or perhaps it was a slow realization of who had spoken, the way his brain sluggishly connected the voice to a face, that made Izuku lift his head from his hands to look at the blurry figure that sat next to him. Or maybe it was the words themselves, so nonchalant, not accusing, but simply pointing out the obvious, that hushed the voices in his mind. "Yeah," Izuku muttered, his voice scratchy and raw. "It is." The figure, Aizawa-sensei, he realized, hummed in contemplation. "It's warmer inside." Izuku rubbed at his eyes with the sleeve of his sweater, then blinked the last of his tears away from his eyes. He was finally able to get a better look at his sensei now that his vision wasn't akin to a fogged window, ice crystals lining the corners. Aizawa looked as calm and collected as his voice had sounded. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, and his head tilted up to gaze at the dark clouds that covered the night sky. His dark hair, framing his face in waves, hid his eyes from view. Izuku sniffled, pleading for the remaining dregs of his breakdown to fall away and melt into the ground like fallen snow. "It's loud inside," Izuku finally managed to say. For the first time, Aizawa moved his heavy gaze away from the sky and onto him. It wasn't anything piercing, nothing analytic or calculating, like how one might look at a puzzle. No, it was soft, gentle and warm without a hint of judgment. Clear understanding reflected in deep onyx eyes, tired but knowing. "I see," was Aizawa's reply before returning his focus to the low-hanging clouds. Silently, almost unnoticeably, tiny specks of snow fluttered downward, already halfway melted by the time they kissed the ground. "It's quiet out here," he murmured. Izuku worried his bottom lip between his teeth, mulling over the words he wanted to say. But as it turned out, he didn't need to say anything at all, because his sensei spoke for him, plucking the words right from the air, as if Izuku had thought them into existence, visible for anyone to see. "You won't inconvenience them, you know," Aizawa said in the same tone of his voice he used when stating the temperature outside, as if it were merely an observation, indisputable fact. "You won't burden them, because your emotions, your worries, are not a burden, Midoriya." Izuku pressed the inside of his hand with his thumb, pushing down with enough pressure that he could feel the blood flow being cut from his fingertips. "But," he whispered, but he could speak no louder without breaking. "They're all happy right now, and I don't want to ruin it, especially since I don't even know why I feel like this." The hero remained quiet for a moment, but only a moment. "Sometimes we feel things without any rhyme or reason. Regardless, it doesn't make your feelings any less important." Aizawa dipped his head down, the bottom half of his face obscured by his capture's weapon, but Izuku could still see the dark eyes that met his own. "It doesn't make you any less important." Another icy inhale caught in Izuku's lungs. Despite the cold air that hung around them, heavy and bone-deep, he could feel a new warmth blossom beneath his ribs. "Oh," he croaked, his breath visible as he spoke. Another lapse of silence fell between them. Neither uttered a word as they watched the snowflakes, now larger than before, drift down. This time, they stuck to the ground in polka dots of white against the dark surface beneath their feet. "It's cold out here," Izuku said, louder now that he knew his voice wouldn't crack. "We should go inside." We should, Aizawa agreed before standing up. Without hesitation, he turned and offered a hand to Izuku, who only hesitated for a moment before slipping his numb fingers into calloused palms, letting the hero guide him up and off the cold, damp bench. Together, basking in the last remnants of quiet, they walked back to the dorms. The dorms were loud this evening, but they were warm too. Alright, everyone, that's the end of this one shot. I really like this one. It was super cute, and it was just like a little small moment that between Izuku and Aizawa that they just decided to point out and add to our fandom. Thank you so much for watching, and have an awesome night/day. Take care of yourselves and drink coffee or water. Apparently that's important nowadays. Have a good one, everyone.